Hello, and welcome to a presentation called Creating Visuals to Support Behavior. My name is Jen Adams, and I am going to be walking you through some information about visual supports for supporting students in the regular education classroom, special education classroom, and even outside of the classroom when it comes to behavior. So let's get started. First thing first. I want to share a little bit of information about myself. As I said, my name is Jen Adams. My background in education starts with me achieving a bachelor's degree in elementary and early childhood education. So I went to school originally just for elementary and early childhood. I actually taught 4 years in an elementary classroom, 2 different grade levels, first grade and pre-kindergarten. And during that time, I just noticed that there was a significant need for skills that I did not have. And I did not feel fully equipped to support all the students in my classroom, specifically when it came to students that had special education needs. So I decided to go back and get my master's in special education. And during that time, I also found an opportunity to work in an alternative education setting as a teacher supporting students in grades 6 through 12, and they would have been considered disruptive youth. So students that were taken out of their typical school placement and put into a temporary placement to get the education and support they needed to then be able to return back to their schools. So I did that for a year and then finally found a pretty solid home for 10 years as a self-contained special education teacher working in an autistic support classroom. And most of my time there was spent in a middle school classroom working with different individuals. And now I am currently working for a cyber charter school in the state of Pennsylvania. I started there as an autistic support teacher, but then recently, I guess it's been over a year now, I have been working as a special education instructional coach at a cyber charter school in Pennsylvania. And I've been loving it, supporting teachers in self-contained classrooms, working with autistic support teachers, life skill support teachers, and emotional support teachers. And some other things to add to where or kind of what I understand in terms of the world of education is I also am a certified administrator or principal. I received that degree during some of my time in my self-contained classroom. I also decided to become a Wilson Reading Certified Practitioner. So I understand and utilize many practices when it comes to the science of reading in my classrooms and help other teachers do it as well. And then last but certainly not least, I am the author and owner of Teach Love Autism, which is a website, a blog. I offer information for teachers and families. I offer resources that you can access, and my website is there, which is www.teachloveautism.com. I recommend checking it out and seeing how it can support you. All right, so the reason why we're here today is we are going to be talking about visual supports and how to use them best in your classroom, how to create them, and kind of why do you need them. So we're going to start off with why do visual supports matter? Well, visuals can really play a crucial role in helping people learn. It doesn't just have to be students in a classroom, but it actually enhances the ability because it has shown in research studies that visuals can help us to better understand things. If you think about it, we see community signs all around us that are visually based. It helps us read them while we are driving, right? So that's a really easy, simple, and practical thing you can think of that we all use. They also provide clear cues to help students understand what's expected and how to navigate an environment more effectively. And again, if I go back to that analogy of driving, you think of a speed limit sign that tells you really quickly what the expectations are about what speed you're going. Same concept applies when we use visuals with students in the classroom. So what are we going to cover today? Well, we're going to talk more about the visual supports. I'm going to give a few examples of different types of visual supports and then give you some practical strategies for not only creating them, but implementing them as well. And I do want to say I am going to talk about both general education classrooms and special education classrooms. So if you're in either type of setting with a student or even at home, you can utilize these visuals. So first, let's start by understanding what our visuals are trying to address. They're trying to address behavior. Behavior always has a reason or a purpose that it happens. Sometimes you'll hear people call that the function of the behavior. We're not going to dive into all of those things. There's a lot of scientific terms involved with it. We're just going to keep it basic today. I just want you to know that when we know why a behavior happens, that helps us to address it and then change it if we want to. So if we understand the reason why a behavior happens, we can add in supports to help that student to alter that behavior, whichever way we would like it to be. If we'd like it to happen more, we can alter a situation and provide interventions to help it happen more. Or if we want to decrease it, we can do the same thing so that it happens less. So, what are visual supports? Now that we've gotten into what is behavior, what are visual supports? Well, visual supports are tools and aids that we can use to help people understand information very quickly and much faster than anything is understood when we verbally say it or when we hear something as well. And these visual supports may have words, they may have pictures, they may have other symbols, diagrams, anything like that. So if you think about anything you read, sometimes you get a better understanding about the information you're reading if there's a diagram or a chart with it, because you can actually see it in a different or more visual format. So the picture on the screen here, this is just a simple little kind of mini schedule that I used to have in my classroom for my students for when they first came in, the things they needed to do. So we had the take off coat, unpack, eat breakfast, wipe down tables, and break. Now, could I have just had the words on that? Absolutely. But for my students that can't read, or my students that have a hard time comprehending written word, this would have been difficult for them. So adding those picture supports next to it really helped them to quickly understand what those words meant. So then they were easily able to apply and understand what the expectations were to get ready for the day, for our school day. So this is a perfect example of kind of pairing words and pictures together. But again, you could just use one or the other and not both, and still consider that that is a visual support. So let's get into the first type of visual support that I wanted to share with you today. The first one is a first then board. And let's go over a little bit of what it is and kind of why you may want to use it. So it usually shows you a sequence of events or activities that are going to take place. Sometimes you'll see, like in this picture here, you see two pictures. You see the word first, you see the word then, and it's showing you first we're going to get some work done, and then we're going to get to go on some type of technology, iPad, computer, for that student. I've also seen ones where it says first, next, then, meaning there's three activities that have to go on in this schedule. But the biggest thing is that with a first then is that you want to make sure whatever is at the end is really enticing and motivating, or a preferred activity for the student. So if you notice here, first we're going to do some work, then you're going to get to play on the computer or the iPad. We definitely want to keep the motivation at the end, saying, okay, first you're going to do this for me, and then you'll get something else. Okay, but this just visually breaks it down. Typically, this happens a lot in our lives. You think of first you go to work and then you get a paycheck, right? So same thing, except for we put this into picture and words in a visual format to better help a student understand. It's also super helpful, especially in a setting where maybe you want the student to remember what is going to happen if they complete their work. Maybe they have issues with remembering things, a working memory problem or deficit, and you want to be able to continuously remind them. So you put a visual like this maybe on their desk. Another scenario I can think of, especially in a general education classroom, is it's not really conducive if you have a student that needs tons of reminders for something like this to be constantly telling them while you're teaching a class. So if you're a general education teacher, even a special ed teacher, but if there's all these things going on in a general education classroom, you probably don't have a lot of time to stop and remind the student, oh, remember, we're going to get our iPad. You can just point to the pictures on here, and that will quickly signal to that student what is coming next if they complete their work. So you don't have to interrupt things as often if you have visuals like this in your classroom. So it helps them there with those expectations, understanding transitions, and how that relationship of, like I said, first we do work, then we earn a reward. Now, how do I create and implement it. We kind of talked the implementation a little bit when I was describing it, but how do I create one? Well, the first thing you have to think about is what do you want those two things to be, right? What is going to be the piece of work or the desired behavior that you want to happen? And then what are they going to earn or receive that's preferred after they do that, right? And you can do this in written form, you can do this in visual form. And then, of course, we create the visual, right? And then the next thing we're going to have to do is introduce it to the students. So you can't just slap this on a student's desk, not tell them anything about it, not explain anything, not show it to them, and expect them to know what it's going to do and what it's going to mean for them. You're going to need to explain it to them, probably follow through with some consistent language, meaning saying it the same way every time. So I don't recommend changing the words. It's always going to be first do this, then do that, and keeping that super consistent, and then making sure absolutely 100% of the time you are providing some kind of reinforcement or preferred activity exactly when they do what you ask, right? We want to make sure they understand that you are going to uphold your end of the deal, that first I'm going to do my work, and then I'm going to earn something I like. You need to hold that and actually make sure it happens. Otherwise, the student's not going to believe it. Then your visual has lost its value to that student. Okay. So in this picture here, this is another type of a first then. It's kind of non-traditional, and I wanted to explain a little bit about it. So the way it works is obviously we see the words first and then they're set up a little differently than that previous one that I shared with you. But here it says first your binder. So actually I had a station set up in my classroom. This was in a self-contained classroom, but you could do this type of station in any classroom. I had binders that had a student's name on it and had materials in it that they specifically would work on. I did teach them at the beginning of the year how to get their binders, how to open them, how to complete the work inside, and then what to do when they were finished. But this was also a quick reminder if the students forgot what was expected of them, because we had different stations and centers going on in the classroom, and this was typically where students would work on their own. So this I left on the desk right where they completed the work, and they could refer to it if they would ever forget, or if a parent needed to walk over quickly and remind a student to keep working, they could just tap the sign and it would remind them of what they were expected to do. So again, first they're going to do their binder. And then in this case, they were going to then complete another activity depending on what day of the week it was. And then every student in my room had a first work, then earn their reward visual that was on their binder that would then get them that preferred activity. Because I'm sure you're looking at this and going, but Jen, you just told me we have to make it work first and then something they like. And this is not that. This is work and work. So this actually, I could have turned into a first work, next work, then, and the reward. But this was just more about at that table. The students knew as soon as they left the table and they were finished that they were going to, we had a timer set for 15 minutes. They were going to rotate then to their preferred activity after that. So we had set that situation up for them so they knew that that was happening. But this is just a different way that you can set it up, and you can see we switched off every day working in different types of materials, and it just provided a great visual that we didn't have to constantly remind the students which one they were going to do. I even had added later on a visual that was just a square that would go around the day of the week so they knew which day it was, and I would have a para that would slide it over every day so the students, if they weren't sure what day of the week it was, that wasn't a hurdle either. So just some ideas for some different first then visuals and then how to implement them. All right, another type of visual support that can be very helpful in lots of different settings is a token board or a token economy board. There's a couple different names I've heard thrown around on what these are. Essentially, what you are doing is you are showing in a visual way how a student's going to earn something that they prefer. Again, similar to the first then, right? So first they need to do something and then they're going to earn something. And so basically what happens with these is you have tokens or points. You can see on this example here, it is stars that they earn for completing something. And this one's kind of joking. It says, I'm working for Friday. This was actually a teacher token board who was working to get to Friday. But usually where that word Friday is, that's where the picture of an iPad or a specific toy or maybe recess or any other preferred activity that you knew the student wanted. It could be a snack. It could be, reading books, as long as it was a preferred activity. Usually I had a board that the students would pick a visual from and stick it on this chart. And then we would add stars as they completed their work to show them they were getting closer and closer to that completion and earning that thing that they wanted. Okay. So this teaches students that concept, like I said, of earning rewards for presenting desirable behaviors. So you have a student that has trouble staying on task. Maybe you focus on giving a star every time they do exhibit that desired behavior of being on task, right? They're working on a worksheet and they're writing things in. And every time you catch them doing that over the course of the time you expect, you add stars until they get to that 5th star and they earn something they like. I've seen lots of different behaviors being applied, but the biggest thing here is you must apply an expected behavior to each of the stars. And it can be in any time frame that you want. I've seen teachers that have said, okay, you'll earn a star if I see you work for 3 minutes, right? And then in total, it's working for 15 minutes by getting all 5 stars. I've seen teachers that say, every time I see you raise your hand quietly, you're going to get a star. And if they raise their hand quietly, because maybe the goal is to decrease interruptions in class, then maybe the student gets whatever the preferred item is immediately following getting that last star. So you can set it up in different ways. It can be time-based. It could be specific to a behavior-based thing. You could even have stars be set up for classes. So maybe you get a star for math class and you get a star. And if the student can handle longer periods of exhibiting whatever that desired behavior or expectation is, you can make them equate to different things. So I've seen teachers where they've said, okay, the first star is for the morning, the second star is for lunch, the third star is for recess, the fourth one is for the assembly we have today, and the fifth one is, maybe a quiet reading time we have at the end of the day. Again, the biggest thing with this is that you are making sure when you implement this that the student understands, right, what the stars represent, what it means. You may need to have a little visual there that says what the star means, or right underneath what they have to do so that they know. So again, how do we create this? How do we implement? I've talked a little bit about it. Let's go a little further. You want to make sure you're targeting specific behaviors and selecting appropriate tokens and rewards for that. So I've seen in both of these images here on these slides, you're seeing stars as the tokens, but I've also seen teachers that have personalized the boards and made it pictures of a favorite movie character or TV show character or video game character or a sport. I had a student who was obsessed with basketball, and so we put basketballs on his to make it more personalized. And that just helped to get some more buy-in from the student using it because they liked that it had the things on it that they liked. So the biggest thing here is making sure you have a clear representation of what it looks like, how are you going to earn them, and what are you going to be able to get in return for earning those rewards or tokens. Again, the other thing I'm going to say with this, like I said with that first then board, is that consistency of follow through. You must, whatever you agree to do with that student on how they're going to earn their stars and how they're going to earn that final reward, you must follow through and give immediate feedback to the student. Very much so in the beginning stages of implementing something like this. If you have a student, I recommend yourself or a paraprofessional constantly giving reinforcement, whether it's a quick pat on the back, showing them they earned 1 star, adding it on, letting them see that, giving some praise and encouragement, and keep going through that. Can you change the number of stars that students can earn in these boards? Absolutely. If you look in this picture here, the top one only has 1 star. The middle one has 5, and the one on the bottom there has 3. And then you can kind of see in that one upper corner, the one up there has 10 stars. So based on how much that student needs reinforcement. So we would also say the fancy term for this is a schedule of reinforcement, meaning how often do they need to earn something in order to be motivated to keep going. So I think of like, if you've ever seen somebody leave a trail of treats for an animal, how far apart do you spread those treats apart in order to make sure they keep following you, right? So it's kind of similar in that, right? I don't necessarily think, I'm not trying to compare animals to children or to people, but it's just an easy analogy for you to understand, right? If you put something that they like half a mile down the road, they're not going to see it. They're not going to smell it. They're not going to know it's there. Same for our students. If we make something unattainable for them, they're not going to be interested. They're going to lose interest quickly and they're going to go, well, I can't get it. It's too hard. So make sure you're thinking about that as well. And you can adjust the number of tokens or stars that the student can earn for it. This visual specifically that's on this screen is actually something that I have created. It is available on my website in my free resource library. Actually, the board in the previous picture is also available for free on my website, but this one in particular actually takes First Then and the token board and puts it together, which I love even more because both of those strategies are very effective for our students. And by combining them, we're taking the best of both of those visuals and using them. So highly recommend you head to my website and go find this resource in my shop. All right, next one. I'm going to talk about transition visuals. And if you're not sure, a transition is anytime we ask a student to move from one activity or area or environment to the other. Okay. And a lot of students, not just special education students, struggle with transitions. Think about us as adults. If somebody asks you while you're sitting on the couch watching your favorite Netflix show to get up off the couch and go make dinner, are you excited to go do that? Or would you love to just sit there and continue watching TV? If it was me, I would love to continue sitting and watching TV. I'm not too crazy about doing that transition. Sometimes it's the same way for our students in the classroom. They're not too excited to transition to whatever that next activity is because they're just not motivated. And so we need to kind of help them and teach them how to transition appropriately. And visual supports can really help with this. Now, the one thing that this does is it provides, of course, those clear expectations. It helps students to know when a transition is coming and kind of reduce the anxiety for that student. We all know as well that sometimes when we know something's coming and it's just something we don't like, we tend to get some anxiety or we just aren't excited to do it. So if we know something's coming, we're prepared for it, we understand what's going to happen, we know the expectations, we feel a little better about it. So you can use visual supports to help students with that. And of course, helping them just to be more independent in transitioning themselves, right? So what I have here in the picture here are actually two different things that I have used to help students with transitions. One of them is a physical item, but it does have a visual component, and that's the picture of me holding the timer. Now, this is a timer that has, the digital time on it. I've seen hourglass timers. I've seen sand timers that, you can visually see the time going away. I also recommend those as highly effective for helping students with transitions, as long as you set the time appropriately. I used to sit one of these on a student's desk in particular who needed to understand how much longer they had to work before they earned a preferred item. And actually, I paired it with a First Then board for that student that I shared with you earlier. The other image that actually looks like a container that says schedule sticks on it was a physical and visual reminder that I would take one of those sticks. We were trying to get the student to understand that once they completed an activity, their job was to transition over to the area where we had their visual schedule in the classroom so they could see what was happening next and then go do whatever it said was next on their schedule. They were constantly struggling to remember to go over to their schedule and see what was going on, mark off that they completed something, and see what activity was next to know where to go. So what we did is we taught the student that if we handed them one of these sticks, it actually said, it's hard to see, but it says check schedule on it. They could read. Otherwise, we maybe would have put a visual on the stick. They then had to take this stick over to where this container was, which was right above their visual schedule. They would drop it in, almost kind of like, okay, completed that. And then they're right in the area they need to be, which is right where the schedule was. And they would check it and then move on. Now, this was something that we were trying to work on, promoting the student to be independent in reading and checking their schedule. And eventually we were able to take this away after implementing it for quite some time. The student just started to go over and do it on their own, and we didn't even have to give them the check schedule stick. So that's just an example of another way you can help students with transitioning with a visual that's maybe not quite as traditional as some of the other ones I shared earlier. Now, how do you create and implement these? Well, you can kind of see with the timer, you're going to purchase it. With the schedule stick, we just wrote check schedule, had the bin that they would put them in. But you definitely want to make sure you're picking, if they need a visual, the right visual that they're going to understand, and make sure they know what it means. So if you have a check schedule picture, what does that look like? Does the student know that that's what that means? You also want to make sure that whatever you use is going to clearly indicate when the transition should occur. So if you're going to use a timer, you need to set the time appropriately. If you're going to flip over one of those like sand timers, make sure that whatever time it's going to end on is the time you expect the transition to happen. And then, like I just said, make sure you're practicing and teaching the student what to do. Make sure you're telling them what's expected, you're modeling it, you're working with them very closely in the beginning, and then you can slowly, slowly, slowly fade away from being so supportive to less supportive to get that independence in completing that transition on their own. So make sure you're being very consistent with the words you use, with the visuals that you're using to help with that transition. And then, of course, again, like every other strategy I've mentioned, make sure you're providing a lot of reinforcement for the student. For following the directions that you've asked them to. And that reinforcement can be verbal praise, it can be high fives, it can be pat on the back, it can be earning a toy, it can be earning some other tangible item that the student enjoys. But make sure you are constantly reinforcing, again, those behaviors you want to see. Now, I touched on this a little bit. This slide here is talking about personalizing visuals. I made the comment earlier about the token board that I had the basketballs on for a student that really enjoyed the sport of basketball. Why is this important? Well, remember, every student is unique and they have certain preferences that they like. I'm sure we can all think of a student that has had some preference in the past that maybe wasn't a preference for us, but it was personalized to them. And it helped to guide, and it also helped to motivate the student to do a lot of things that we were hoping that they would do. So make sure you're thinking about ways you can personalize your visual supports, whether it's putting the student's name on them, involving the student in the process of making the visual could be really cool, helping them to give you the ideas of maybe the visuals that they want, or which one do they think means to check their schedule, or which one do they like for their tokens. It all can help with getting that buy-in, getting that student to want to use it, and increase that motivation. Don't forget as well, you can also use other members on either the IEP team or in the classroom, such as parents, caregivers, teachers that know the student well, related service providers. They can all be great insights to help you with personalizing the materials that you want to use, so that those students, again, are going to buy into using those supports and being motivated to do what you're asking them to do with them. All right, so let's get into some tips and some things that we've touched on a little bit as I've been explaining each of the different types of visuals, how to create them and how to implement them. First tip is introduce things gradually. I said this a little bit earlier, but make sure you are providing clear expectations and you're modeling the use. If that means you have to show the student what it would look like if you were them and actually physically model the expectation, do it. If you need to just verbally explain it to them, do that. There's lots of different ways that you can model Sometimes even having a peer model the expectations can be a great way, especially if it's a peer that that student who you're trying to get to learn that skill admires or is a friend with, and they want to be like them. That can also be highly motivating as well. So making sure you're modeling how to use the material, how it's going to help the student, and providing those explanations is really important to getting that student on board to using it. We also talked about being consistent when delivering. If we said, okay, first you're going to work, then you're going to earn the iPad, making sure that the student does get that opportunity to use the item that they're motivated by if you said that's going to happen. So keeping a good routine and structure is really important. The other piece is remembering that the best way to utilize this is across many different environments. So yes, is it beneficial to start in a classroom first? And if it's special education, maybe you're going to do it in your self-contained classroom. And maybe if it's general education, you're going to be in your homeroom teacher's classroom. But if you have a student that travels to different classrooms, or maybe goes for a related service such as speech therapy or occupational therapy, or they go out for a specials class like gym or art, see if you can be consistent in having those visual supports in many different places so that the student gets used to doing it across different environments in the school. And then, of course, also add this in to doing it in the home. So working with families, helping them to know how you implement it in the classroom. So then if it's beneficial for them to implement at home, they can do it as well using the same language, the same motivational items. All can be really helpful to consistently support the student across many environments. The other thing you're going to want to do is monitor student progress and gather feedback to make necessary adjustments to the visual supports. It is very possible the first visual support you create isn't going to be perfect, isn't going to work exactly the way you wanted it to. Maybe you realize the visual that gives a direction isn't the right one because the student doesn't seem to understand what it means. Or maybe you realize the student needs text instead of visuals, or it needs both. These are all things you need to be aware of, that you may have to adjust the supports that you have for the student. You may have to try different types of supports. I shared 3 different types in this presentation today, and maybe only a first then board works for the student. They don't like the token economy. They're not interested in a timer. So we got to go with the first then board or some other combination. And like I showed you earlier, that first then board that also had the stars on it, maybe that's a really good resource because it has everything together for that student. But be willing to adjust the visuals, and don't just think because it's the first one you've used that that's the right one for the student. You may have to try different ones. And then, of course, monitoring that student's progress. I would highly recommend keeping some kind of notes, data to show if your visual support is working. So if we're not keeping track, we're not probably properly assessing if that support is beneficial. So if you've ever heard of the phrase data or it didn't happen, that basically means if we're not keeping track of the progress a student is making utilizing a support, then how do we actually know it's helping? So keep that in mind as well. You may want to come up with some kind of a system to either take notes or take data on how it's working for that student, and if it's going well or not. And then look at that data and decide, are we going to keep trying this or do we need to try something new? Again, being open to making changes if you need to. The visual support in this picture here is a visual schedule from my store. I call it the editable visual schedule. It has a couple different variations of how you can make it and put it together. Essentially, this visual helps students with transitions, with understanding the classroom expectations. It helps them know what their schedule is each day. And you can see it utilizes a variety of different types of images. So as you can see here, I've got some Smarty Symbols images, which is that clip art that you see there on the screen. And then there's actually a version next to it that has real photos on it of our actual school. So I liked both options for students. Some students responded better to the clip art images. Some students responded better to the actual pictures of our classroom so that they could generalize and know what the expectation was, where they needed to be, what it actually looked like. And so both of these worked really well for the students. The other thing that this helped with for the students is you can see that there's these flaps, right? The green and red on there. The red meant it wasn't done. The green meant it was completed or finished, and the student would have to close the flap to essentially show that it was completed. This also helped to add an action item in. If you think about that student earlier, I was talking about that struggled with going and checking their schedule. This schedule worked amazing because the student had to go over to close the flap, which then why not just check your schedule and see what you have to go do next, right? While you're over there. So this worked really well. If this is something you're interested in looking into more, want a schedule like this for your classroom, feel free to head to my website. This is in my store. And actually, I do have several blog posts as well that you can read about this specific schedule and how to use it in your classroom. All right. So, in conclusion, today, I wanted to just share a few more notes. So, just make sure when you're using your visual supports that you're trying to help students with enhancing the learning in your classroom and their behavior. And for students, particularly with special needs, visual supports are highly effective in doing this. And then as a teacher, just make sure you understand the process of creating these materials and then implementing them so that you can meet the needs of your students. I shared lots of ideas of what to think about when you're creating things. What do you need to know to put on these visuals, and also how to implement them correctly with the students so you can see the highest rate of success for everyone in the room. And so the teacher can be happy with what they're seeing in their classroom, and the student can be successful with what they're learning or doing in there as well. All right, so that is the end of the presentation for today. So thank you so much for coming. I loved every second of this. I hope you enjoyed all the information as well. I did want to say that I do have, for anyone that's in attendance today, I have a freebie for you. I will provide you the link where you're viewing this. And then I also just wanted to say thank you very much, and know that all of these places you can see here on the screen are places that you can connect with me if you're interested in learning more about visual supports and lots of other subjects in special education. Of course, you can go to my website. I have a website store. I have a Facebook page and group. I also have a Teachers Pay Teachers store. You can find me on Pinterest for more ideas, Instagram, and TikTok. Again, my name is Jen Adams. I want to thank you so much for coming today and all of the things that you do for your students and children when you work with them. And I hope that what I presented on today gave you some more ideas to do that better. All right. Have a great day.